The Dallas County Courthouse was buzzing with its usual bustle, but today, something was about to happen that would change one officer's life forever. Officer Karen Mitchell, a 15-year veteran of the force, marched into courtroom 4B, dragging a handcuffed man behind her. She'd seen it all, every kind of criminal and every type of suspect. But something about this one felt different. Her boots clicked sharply on the polished floor as she shoved the man into the courtroom. He was rugged, his face shadowed by a dusty cowboy hat, his demeanor calm. His clothes were simple, worn jeans, a faded denim shirt, and scuffed leather boots. Nothing about him screamed danger, but Mitchell's instincts were on high alert. As she introduced him to the judge, her voice rang out with the authority she'd honed over years of service. The man was just another troublemaker in her eyes, until something shifted. The gallery, usually indifferent to the day's routine, erupted in whispers. The judge froze, hand still raised to his gavel, and the tension in the room was palpable. The suspect lifted his head slightly, revealing his face for the first time. That's when Mitchell's heart sank. Behind the beard and cowboy hat were eyes she knew all too well, eyes that had been on posters, movies, and television screens across Texas. It was Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris, the man who had trained countless officers. The martial arts legend who had served as an honorary Texas Ranger. The very man she had just handcuffed. In an instant everything changed. The judge, his voice trembling with surprise, turned to Norris, apologizing profusely. "Do you wish to press charges?" he asked. But Chuck Norris, ever the calm presence, simply shook his head. Instead of retaliation, he offered something far more valuable, the chance for redemption. Chuck Norris didn't press charges. He didn't seek retribution. Instead, he offered Officer Mitchell a life-changing lesson in strength, humility, and responsibility. What followed was a journey that would transform her, from a hardened officer, quick to use force, to a protector who learned the true meaning of power. This is the story of how a moment of humiliation became the turning point for Officer Karen Mitchell, a story of second chances, self-reflection, and growth. This is Acts of Kindness Stories. Stay with us and witness how a mistake can lead to a life-altering lesson that we all need to learn. As the morning unfolded in the Dallas County Courthouse, everything seemed as ordinary as any other day. The air was thick with the sounds of hurried footsteps, the rustle of paperwork, and the faint clink of courtroom doors opening and closing. But all of that changed when Officer Karen Mitchell, with years of experience behind her, stepped into courtroom 4B. She was in control, or so she thought. She marched forward, guiding a handcuffed man, her boots striking the marble floor with sharp precision. Her years of service had trained her to recognize trouble, and this man, standing before her, raised every red flag. He seemed calm, almost too calm. He wasn't flinching, wasn't nervous, nothing that would suggest guilt, but something about him triggered every instinct Karen had spent 15 years sharpening on the force. The man's demeanor bothered her. She could feel her grip on his arm tighten with the need for control, a habit she had honed over the years. He wasn't resisting, but Karen could see the tension in his eyes. He was measured, too composed. Maybe that was what unsettled her. She was used to seeing nervousness or fear in the eyes of those she arrested, but this man was different. His gaze was steady, and his body language exuded calm. In her mind, he was just another troublemaker, someone who had drawn the wrong kind of attention. She assumed the worst. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and assertive, as she introduced the charges. "Resisting arrest. Suspicious behavior." The words slipped out smoothly, as they always did. But what happened next was something Karen never saw coming. The courtroom, which had been indifferent to the routine proceedings, erupted in whispers. It wasn't just the usual chatter. Something felt off. The tension in the room thickened, and even the judge, who was typically in control of his surroundings, paused mid-motion. His gavel hovered in the air, his expression unreadable. It wasn't just the judge. The whole room had frozen, as if collectively holding its breath. Phones came out of pockets, ready to capture what was about to unfold. Even the young clerk, who was always quick on his feet, dropped his pen, and the sound of it hitting the floor felt like a sharp crack in the stillness. Karen's eyes scanned the room, confused, until she finally looked at her prisoner. As if he sensed the change, the man slowly lifted his head. And that's when it happened. Karen's entire world seemed to come crashing down. Behind the beard and cowboy hat, there were eyes she had seen countless times before. Eyes that had been immortalized in movies, TV shows, and posters. Eyes that had been a part of Texas history. Chuck Norris stood before her. The man who had spent decades training law enforcement officers, the martial arts legend, the television icon, was the one she had just treated like a common criminal. Her heart sank. The room seemed to shrink, and Karen felt a wave of shame wash over her. How had she not recognized him? How had she missed the signs, the bumper sticker on his truck, the Walker Texas Ranger crew pass hanging from his rearview mirror? But all of that seemed irrelevant now. She had treated a man who had shaped the lives of countless officers as a mere troublemaker. And now, the whole world was about to see her mistake. The judge, his voice now shaky, cleared his throat. "Officer Mitchell," he began, his tone markedly different. "Would you please read the charges?" Karen's hands trembled as she reached for her notepad. The words, usually so automatic, felt foreign now. Suspicious behavior. Resisting arrest. Failure to comply with an officer's orders. She looked at the paperwork she had taken from Chuck's truck, and for the first time, she actually read it. And that's when it hit her. The name on the license, the one she had brushed aside in her haste, was no mistake. It was Carlos Ray Chuck Norris. The room was buzzing with disbelief. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, and the gallery of spectators seemed to hold their collective breath as they witnessed this moment unfold. Chuck Norris, the man who had taught thousands of officers about strength, humility, and responsibility, stood in front of her in handcuffs. But Chuck Norris didn't press charges. Instead, he offered her something far more valuable, a lesson that would change her life forever. "Do you wish to press charges?" the judge asked, his voice now full of respect. Chuck shook his head. "No, Your Honor," he said calmly. "But I would like to say something." The courtroom fell silent. Every eye in the room was now focused on Chuck Norris, who had the room's full attention without raising his voice. "I've spent my life teaching that real strength isn't about dominating others," Chuck began, his voice carrying a weight that commanded respect. "It's about knowing when to protect and serve. I've trained law enforcement officers for years, and the first lesson I teach them is that a badge isn't a weapon. It's a responsibility." Karen stood frozen, her world crashing down as the full extent of her actions hit her. How many times had she used her badge to assert control, to overpower those who didn't comply with her commands? How many times had she escalated situations out of fear, out of a need to feel powerful? Chuck continued, his words cutting through her defenses. "True strength," he said, "isn't about how hard you can strike. It's about knowing when not to fight." A sharp pang of realization shot through Karen. She had forgotten what it meant to be a protector, to serve with compassion and wisdom. All these years, she had relied on force to assert authority, to dominate, but she had lost sight of the true power in guiding others. And then, Chuck offered her a chance to change. "I want to offer Officer Mitchell an opportunity," Chuck said, his voice steady. "I'd like her to spend 1 week at my ranch, learning from me and my students. Learning what real strength looks like." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Karen's heart skipped a beat. This was no longer about her mistake. This was about redemption, about becoming the officer she had always aspired to be but had lost along the way. 1 week at Chuck Norris's ranch would be her chance to learn the lessons she needed to transform. But Karen didn't know if she was ready for what she would find there. It was time to face the truths she had buried deep within herself, to confront the way she had been policing for years. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but as Chuck looked at her with calm encouragement, she found herself whispering, "Yes, sir. I'm willing to learn." The week at Chuck Norris's ranch was unlike anything Karen had ever experienced. When she arrived, the first thing Chuck said to her was, "Leave your badge in the car." It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a challenge. Karen was no longer an officer. She was simply a student just like everyone else. Inside the training center, there were no uniforms of power, no badges to distinguish authority. The walls were lined with philosophical quotes and martial arts principles, reminders that true power didn't come from a badge or a uniform, but from within. Chuck's students, young and old, practiced martial arts with a fluid grace that Karen had never seen. They moved through their forms with purpose, with respect for themselves and for each other. She couldn't help but notice some of the kids she had arrested in the past. Kids who had been labeled as troublemakers, just like she had labeled them. But here, they weren't criminals to be controlled. They were individuals, learning the same lessons Chuck had taught her. And then, Chuck led Karen through the training exercises. The first was simple enough. "Show me how you handle a resistant suspect." Without thinking, Karen approached, using all the techniques she had learned over her years on the force. Forceful, aggressive, and quick to overpower. But within seconds, Chuck had her on the mat, her body pressed down with a gentle yet firm hold. He didn't fight her strength. He redirected it. "Let me show you how to control a situation without creating an enemy," Chuck said, helping her to her feet. And that's when Karen realized. The true goal wasn't to prove who was stronger. The true goal was to protect both herself and the person she was dealing with. In that moment, everything she had thought about policing began to unravel. She had spent years treating every encounter like a battle. But Chuck was teaching her that it wasn't about domination. It was about guidance. As the week progressed, Karen's eyes began to open. Every day was a new challenge. Physically, emotionally, and mentally. She was learning not just martial arts techniques but lessons that would reshape the way she viewed her role in law enforcement. After a transformative week at Chuck Norris's ranch, Officer Karen Mitchell found herself standing in front of the same badge she had once worn with pride. But now, it was different. The weight of her badge had shifted. It no longer symbolized just authority. It was a reminder of the responsibility she had toward the community she had sworn to protect. Returning to patrol wasn't easy. The streets she once cruised with a hardened mentality now looked different. They weren't filled with threats and adversaries. They were filled with people who needed guidance, not force. The familiar calls over the radio, the disturbances, the arguments, she saw them through new eyes. Each call was an opportunity, not just to act but to truly listen and understand. One afternoon, the radio crackled with a disturbance at Carter High School. A situation that a year ago would have had her rushing in with sirens blaring, hands ready to cuff. But this time Karen slowed down. She parked a distance away, taking a deep breath, assessing the situation with a calm that felt foreign but right. There were two teenagers in the parking lot, surrounded by a crowd of onlookers. One of them, a familiar face, was Kevin, Marcus's younger brother. Kevin had spent time with Chuck's group at the ranch, learning the same lessons Karen had. She approached them, calm and steady, her hands visible at her sides. The crowd, expecting the same tough, aggressive officer, fell silent as they watched. She locked eyes with Kevin and with a soft voice she said, "Show me what you learned at the ranch." Kevin's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Slowly, he lowered his fists and stepped back. His opponent, unsure, looked around, confused. And in that moment, Karen didn't have to shout commands or threaten. She let her actions speak for her. "Sometimes," she said, her voice carrying across the lot, "the strongest move is stepping away." The crowd, instead of becoming tense, relaxed. The situation dissolved without a single threat or act of force. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Strength isn't about overpowering. It's about knowing when to de-escalate, when to listen, and when to guide. Karen's reflection in a nearby window caught her off guard. She wasn't a warrior ready to strike. She was a guardian there to protect, not to control. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, knowing that her role had shifted. She was no longer an enforcer. She was a protector, someone who could lift others up rather than break them down. Months passed, and Karen's transformation spread through the community. She wasn't just an officer of the law. She was a beacon of hope, someone who taught others the value of understanding, patience, and humility. She took what Chuck had taught her and began to apply it in every interaction, not just with the troubled youth she once arrested, but with everyone she encountered. Her patrols had become a journey of redemption, not just for her, but for those she had once viewed as threats. She no longer saw them as enemies. She saw them as people, each with their own struggles and challenges, all deserving of respect and the chance to change. It wasn't just Karen who had changed. The community around her was changing too. Her willingness to learn, to grow, and to share her own vulnerability had set off a ripple effect. It wasn't about wielding power. It was about showing others that they were worth protecting, worth guiding. One day, she arrived at Chuck's ranch with a young man in tow, a 16-year-old named Jason, whom she had once arrested. Instead of reaching for handcuffs, Karen reached out with an offer, just like Chuck had done for her. Jason was going to learn the same lessons she had learned. He would see the true strength in control, not dominance. As Karen stood there, watching Chuck nod in approval, she realized something profound. She had come full circle. The mistake that could have ended her career had instead transformed it, leading her to something far more meaningful, a chance to become the officer she had always wanted to be. Not just a law enforcer but a true protector. And the lesson didn't stop with her. It spread from the youth she helped guide to the fellow officers she mentored. In the end, Karen's journey wasn't just about what she learned at Chuck's ranch. It was about what she had learned about herself. That true strength isn't about the ability to break someone down, but the ability to lift them up, to guide them toward a better future. If Karen's story has inspired you, if you believe in the power of second chances, growth, and kindness, then join us. Like, share, and comment to let us know how you think we can continue to spread positive change in our communities. Don't forget to subscribe to Acts of Kindness Stories. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers and continue sharing stories that can change lives. Every interaction is a chance to make a difference. Let's keep the ripple going.